In my last video, I talked about Senator Jim Banks, who's from my home state of Indiana, arguing that the 14th Amendment doesn't mean what it plainly says about citizenship. Now, that argument keeps resurfacing because it's been used before against different groups in different ways and different times whenever belonging felt inconvenient. So Native Americans were excluded from U.S. citizenship for decades after the 14th Amendment because the federal government treated them as members of sovereign tribal nations and therefore not fully subject to U.S. jurisdiction. Now that sounds principled, but the way it was applied, it was so selective and always in the government's favor. Native people were considered sovereign enough to deny citizenship, but not sovereign enough to prevent land seizure, forced removal, or federal control. Citizenship became conditional. And Mexican Americans faced a different version of the same problem. After the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised U.S. citizenship to Mexicans living in the territories the United States took over. On paper, they were citizens. In practice, that citizenship was treated as fragile. During the Great Depression, federal, state, and local governments carried out what historians now call the Mexican repatriation campaigns, which lasted from about 1929 to 1936. Between 1 and 2 million people of Mexican descent were removed or coerced into leaving the United States. Historians estimate that up to 60% were U.S. citizens, many of them children. Citizenship papers were often ignored, families were pressured to leave together, and removal was based largely on appearance and language, not legal status. Chinese immigrants were excluded in a way that was both clearer and more explicit than what we saw with the Mexican Americans. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was the first time the U.S. barred an entire group from immigration and citizenship based solely on race and nationality. Chinese immigrants were welcomed when their labor was needed to build railroads, work mines, and farmland, but they were legally prevented from ever fully belonging. That's the key difference. Chinese exclusion was overt, statutory, and racial. The government did not pretend citizenship was coming later. They said it plainly, not for you. These are not separate stories. They show the same pattern. Again and again in U.S. history, citizenship expands when it's convenient and contracts when power feels threatened. Legal language gets reinterpreted to justify exclusion people already want. That's exactly what the 14th Amendment was written to stop. So when Jim Banks argues that citizenship doesn't mean what it says, he isn't making a new claim. He's repeating a very old one, and history shows us where that logic leads.